Iran just made a threat that should have every single person paying attention, and not just in the Middle East. This isn't the usual back and forth political noise. This is something different, something that could change the entire landscape of global conflict as we know it. So stay with me, because what's unfolding right now between the United States and Iran is moving faster than most people realize, and the consequences could reach far beyond anything we've seen in recent memory. Let's start from the beginning, because context matters here. President Trump has been walking a very fine line when it comes to Iran. On one side, he's been pushing hard for diplomatic talks, trying to get a deal done, trying to avoid a full-scale military confrontation. On the other side, he's made it crystal clear that military action is absolutely on the table. And this week, that tension reached a boiling point in a way that caught a lot of people off guard. Trump told reporters, and these are his exact words, "I was an hour away from making the decision to go today." Let that sink in for a moment. 1 hour, 60 minutes away from what could have been a massive military strike on Iran. He pulled back at the last minute, he said, in the hopes that diplomatic talks could still move forward. But then he added something that sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles around the world. "We may have to give them another big hit. I'm not sure yet. You'll know very soon." That phrase, "you'll know very soon," is not the kind of language that calms tensions. That's the kind of language that puts everyone on high alert. And Iran was listening. Here's what happened next. And this is where things get very serious. Iran's Revolutionary Guards responded almost immediately. Through a statement aired on state media, they issued a warning that goes well beyond anything they've said before. The statement reads, "If aggression against Iran is repeated, the promised regional war will extend beyond the region this time." Beyond the region. Those three words are the ones that matter most right now. Think about what that means. Iran is no longer just threatening to retaliate within the Middle East. They are explicitly warning that any future U.S. strike would trigger attacks on countries outside the region entirely. Now, Tehran didn't spell out exactly which countries they were talking about. They didn't name specific targets. But the message was unmistakably clear. If Trump pulls the trigger, Iran is prepared to take this fight global. And here's what most people are missing about this moment. This isn't an empty threat from a country that has no capability to follow through. Iran's Revolutionary Guards have been around for decades. They have proxy networks spread across multiple continents. They have deep ties with militant groups in places you wouldn't immediately think of. And they've been quietly, methodically preparing for exactly this kind of escalation for years. Let's break this down a little further, because the military posturing happening inside Iran right now is telling a story all on its own. In Tehran, Revolutionary Guard members have been holding public demonstrations, not behind closed doors, not in some hidden military base, but out in the streets, showing ordinary citizens how to handle Kalashnikov-style assault rifles. That's a very deliberate, very public message. They want the world to see it. They want the United States to see it. These are not the actions of a government that's quietly hoping diplomacy works out. These are the actions of a government that is actively preparing its population for conflict. And it doesn't stop there. Military parades through Tehran have been featuring vehicles mounted with belt-fed Soviet-era machine guns. Again, public, visible, deliberate. This is Iran sending a message in the most visual way possible. We are not backing down, we are not afraid, and we are ready. So now you have to ask yourself, what exactly is each side trying to achieve here? Because when you understand the goals, the conflict starts to make a lot more sense. Trump's position is actually pretty straightforward when you strip away all the noise. His primary goal, the thing he keeps coming back to again and again, is Iran's commitment to not pursue nuclear weapons. That's it. That's the red line for the United States. No nukes. If Iran can make a credible, verifiable commitment to step back from nuclear development, Trump has signaled he's open to a deal. He's been willing to negotiate. He held off on that strike. He's trying to give diplomacy a chance. But here's the problem. And this is the part that makes this situation so incredibly complicated. Iran's demands are essentially the opposite of what the U.S. is asking for. Tehran is not coming to the table with modest requests. They're not asking for a little relief here, a little compromise there. Iran is demanding sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically critical waterways in the entire world, responsible for moving roughly 20% of the world's oil supply. And they are demanding the full withdrawal of U.S. troops from neighboring countries. Oh, and on the nuclear question, No concessions, none. These two positions are not just far apart, they are fundamentally incompatible. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous. When you have a superpower on one side saying no nuclear weapons and a regional power on the other side saying we're not giving anything up, and both sides are openly talking about military action, you are not in a negotiation anymore. You are in a standoff. And standoffs, historically, do not end quietly. Now let's zoom out for a second and talk about the Strait of Hormuz specifically, because I think a lot of people underestimate just how significant this is. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. At its narrowest point, it's only about 21 miles wide. And yet roughly a fifth of the world's total oil passes through that strait every single day. Tankers carrying oil from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, all of it flows through this tiny channel. If Iran were to blockade or control the Strait of Hormuz, the ripple effects on global energy markets would be felt immediately, and they would be severe. Gas prices, supply chains, economies around the world. This isn't just a Middle East problem. It's a global economic pressure point, and Iran knows this. That's why it's one of their central demands. Control over that strait is leverage, enormous leverage, and they're not going to give that up without getting something significant in return. But Trump isn't offering something significant in return. He's offering the opposite. He's telling Iran to stand down on nuclear ambitions and presumably on this kind of regional influence expansion. So you can see why talks have stalled. You can see why the situation keeps ratcheting up instead of cooling down. Here's something else worth paying attention to. And most people completely glossed over this. Trump revealed that he had already been close to ordering strikes before the 6-week ceasefire he agreed to. He pulled back then, and now he's publicly saying he might need to deliver another big hit. The word another implies there have already been strikes, or at least serious military engagement. This isn't a hypothetical conversation anymore. This is an active conflict that has already seen significant escalation, and we are now watching both sides decide in real time how much further they're willing to push. Think about the pressure that puts on every country in the region, every U.S. ally in the Middle East, every country that hosts American military bases, Jordan, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. These nations have all been watching this unfold, and they know that if Iran follows through on its threat to extend the conflict beyond the region, they could find themselves in the crosshairs simply because of their relationship with the United States. And now Iran is explicitly warning that the next escalation won't stay contained. That changes everything, because when you have a conflict that's been largely focused on bilateral tensions between the U.S. and Iran, and one side suddenly says the war won't stay regional, every other country in the world starts doing math. Europe starts doing math. Russia is watching. China is watching. Every nation that has any kind of diplomatic, economic, or military relationship with any of the parties involved is now quietly reassessing its position. This is how small conflicts become larger ones, not in one dramatic moment, but through a series of escalating threats, miscalculations, and moments where each side pushes just a little further than the last time until suddenly the situation is unmanageable. Are we there yet? No, not yet. But the signals are pointing in a concerning direction, and here's why. Trump was 1 hour away from ordering a strike, and he changed his mind. That's a good sign in the short term. It means there's still a window for diplomacy. But he also immediately followed that restraint with language about potentially delivering another big hit and telling reporters they'll know very soon. That kind of mixed messaging is dangerous in a high-stakes situation like this. It sends a signal that the U.S. is still very much considering military action, which keeps Iran on a hair trigger. And Iran's response, threatening to extend the war beyond the region, is equally dangerous. Because now the U.S. has to take that threat seriously. Military planners, intelligence officials, and diplomats have to factor in the possibility that any strike on Iran could trigger a response that reaches into Europe, Asia, or beyond. That raises the stakes of any decision dramatically. What we are watching in real time is two very powerful actors locked in a game of brinkmanship, each trying to convince the other that they are willing to go further than the other side is prepared to handle. The goal of brinkmanship is to force a capitulation without actually having to cross the line. But the risk of brinkmanship is always the same. What happens when neither side blinks? There are a few scenarios playing out here, and it's worth thinking through each of them. In the first scenario, diplomacy works. Iran and the United States find some kind of middle ground. maybe not on everything, but enough to de-escalate. Iran makes some kind of concession on nuclear development. The U.S. pulls back from the threat of strikes, and both sides agree to keep talking. This is the best-case outcome, and it's still possible. Trump's willingness to hold off on strikes suggests he prefers this path, for now. In the second scenario, diplomacy fails, and the U.S. carries out strikes on Iran. Iran retaliates, but the conflict stays largely contained within the Middle East. This is bad, but it's a known kind of bad. It's the kind of conflict that military and diplomatic experts have been planning for and modeling for years. Devastating in the region, disruptive globally, but manageable in a geopolitical sense. The third scenario is the one that Iran's latest statement is pointing toward, a conflict that doesn't stay contained, one where Iran's threat of attacking countries outside the Middle East becomes a reality. This is the scenario that keeps foreign policy experts up at night, because once that line is crossed, the response from other nations becomes unpredictable. NATO treaties get triggered, other powers get drawn in, and what started as a dispute over nuclear policy becomes something much larger and much harder to control. Nobody wants scenario 3, not the U.S., not Europe, not even most of Iran's allies. But the fact that Iran is openly invoking it as a possibility tells you how serious they are about not backing down. So what should you be watching for in the days and weeks ahead? Watch Trump's language. Is he continuing to leave a door open for diplomacy, or does the tone start shifting toward inevitability? Watch the movement of U.S. military assets in the region. Aircraft carriers, strike groups, troop deployments. Those movements tell a story long before any official announcement. Watch what Iran's Revolutionary Guards do next. Are the public demonstrations and parades escalating, or do they begin to quiet down? Watch whether any third-party countries, maybe Qatar, maybe Oman, countries that have historically played the role of back-channel intermediaries, start making unusual diplomatic moves. Those quiet conversations often happen before the big ones. And perhaps most importantly, watch the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran starts moving naval assets or makes any kind of provocative move in that waterway, the situation will escalate very quickly because the U.S. cannot allow that strait to be disrupted. The economic consequences would be immediate and global. Here's the bottom line, and I want to be very clear about this. We are in a genuinely dangerous moment in U.S.-Iran relations, not because war is inevitable. It's not. But because both sides are currently making decisions that could very easily go wrong. Trump was 1 hour away from ordering a strike. Iran is now threatening attacks beyond the Middle East. The gap between what each side is demanding is enormous, and the military posturing happening inside Iran right now is not the behavior of a government that's quietly hoping the other side makes the first concession. Diplomacy is still alive, but it's on very thin ice. The world has seen this kind of moment before, where two sides were so locked into their positions, so committed to not appearing weak, that the window for a peaceful resolution quietly closed before anyone even realized it was happening. The hope is that the people in the room, the negotiators, the advisors, the leaders making these decisions, understand just how narrow that window is right now. Because the alternative isn't just a problem for the United States or Iran. The alternative, based on Iran's own statement, is a conflict that could reach anywhere. So the real question worth sitting with tonight is this. With both sides digging deeper into their positions and with the threats now explicitly reaching beyond the region, where exactly does this end? And who, if anyone, has enough influence to stop it before we find out the hard way? That's the conversation the world needs to be having right now.